Hi guys, I'm here and welcome to the workshop. Today we are doing a little experiment with disc brakes. Most bikes that I work on are now disc brake bikes, and while they have some advantages, one thing that is quite common is, particularly with SRAM monoblock calipers. The new ones are just fine, but this is the original eTap HRD caliper, and it comes also with some of the Red eTap axis group sets and the S900 tanchal levers. So this is the first high-end version of the SRAM caliper, and it's very good in terms of weight, modulation, brake performance, etc. But one thing that's a bit of a problem with it is that there's very little clearance between the pads and the rotor, no matter how well you adjust it or which rotor you use. This can result in rubbing, and even if you manage to adjust it without rubbing when you're riding along, it can happen that when you start to sprint or climb out of the saddle, the rotor starts pinging into the caliper. So this is obviously not ideal because you're losing power there. Now, one solution I have is to use Shimano brake rotors because they're slightly thinner, but sometimes that doesn't help. And one solution other than that I found was Hope RX4 brake calipers. Now these are designed to have wider spacing for the brake pads. As you can see, the caliper itself is larger. This is specifically designed to be a road brake caliper for flat mount brakes, and it has separate front and rear versions, unlike the standard SRAM units. So this is the front one. As you can see, the flat mount adapter included in the one-piece CNC milled, beautifully made by the way, caliper, and same thing for the rear. Now this is a very nice design. Obviously it helps with stiffness and alignment if you don't have two components matched. One problem I have with this is that the rear caliper I can't use on my bikes, because this way it only caters for a 160mm rotor. But anyway, that's not a problem because I never had the issue with the rear brake. The problematic part is the front brake, which this could neatly solve, hopefully. This is the first time I'm going to install a caliper like this on a customer's bike, so I will rely on his experience to let you know what are the differences. What you do get with the brakes are the fittings for the brake hose, because it will be slightly different than the standard caliper. Then you get, of course, the bleed blocks and two sets of brake pads for each, so that's nice. I presume one of them is organic, the other one is metallic. A manual which basically covers how you install the hose, and the rest of it is basically the same as with any other brake. One thing you do need to note is these are available for Shimano and SRAM, and you can't mix them up because Shimano uses mineral oil, SRAM uses DOT fluid, so the internals in there are designed to chemically resist one or the other. You can't have both. If you're installing this on a SRAM system, the bleed kit that you have is going to work just fine. But if you're installing this on Shimano and you only have a Shimano bleed kit, you will need to invest in a syringe which has the fitting with an M5 caliper. Or sorry, an M. If you're fitting this on a Shimano brake, however, and you have a Shimano bleed kit, you will need to invest in a syringe that has an M5 ending, like on a SRAM brakes, because that's what the Hope caliper uses. So other than that, it should be a pretty straightforward installation, and I'm curious to see about the results. If it will work, I will fit a front one on one of my own bikes too. So let's get cracking. Okay, so fast forward a couple of weeks and we already have a good wealth of knowledge about the Hope RX4 calipers. So this is the SRAM version, as I said, and we have replaced the monoblock HRD calipers, which are notorious for having very little pad clearance. Now, if you do that, if you do this change, you will need to bear in mind that you will probably need a longer brake hose, because the HRD caliper has a banjo style fitting. If you cut it off, you're left with a hose that's around 2-3 centimeters shorter, which you might not reach or be long enough to apply the compression fitting of the Hope caliper. So just to illustrate, you will have to cut off this whole bit, and then it's just too short. So I had to change the brake hoses. Not ideal, but anyway, I have managed to install this. Otherwise the installation is pretty straightforward. Bleeding was very easy with the front brake, because then you just stick to the recommendations in the Hope manual and it's good to go. But the problem arises if you try to bleed the rear brake. It's positioned differently, and the Hope caliper is a lot more complicated, having 4 pistons, so it's not so easy to clear out the air from it. And if you adhere to the Hope recommendations and you press the pistons in and out and work them around, then you get the air out of the caliper. But yeah, as it's tilted upwards and you have to kind of tilt the whole bike to take it back so the bleed port is at the highest point, then the problem is that your brake lever no longer works as it should, as it was designed to be bled. So you will still have air bubbles there. So I've messed around with it for around 2 hours until I find a good way to get the air out of the rear brake. So that's a bit of an annoyance. If you just stick to the SRAM process, then you still get air bubbles at the caliper. So you have to basically mix and match the two processes to get it working correctly. But I've managed to do that. It's all well and good. And yeah, the calipers look pretty neat. Although this being an aero bike, it adds quite a lot of chunk compared to the slim SRAM caliper. If I just illustrate the difference right there. So anyway, the main point we wanted to achieve, and Hope also advertises this in the product description, is that you get a lot more pad clearance than with other brakes. Well, unfortunately, I don't really find this to be the case. Pad clearance is sufficient, but I would say it's less than in a well-worn set of HRD calipers or the newer SRAM 2-piece calipers or the Shimano standard calipers. So on that front, we didn't gain anything, I would say. What you do get from this, to be honest, beast of a caliper is huge stopping power. So I think this would be a really interesting upgrade for someone that's big, heavy, and rides fast on the downhills and has tough braking, etc. In that case, or gravel riding, bike packing, loaded bikes, there the riders will surely appreciate the power of this caliper, because yeah, it's a significant increase there. But yeah, unfortunately we didn't hit the clearance that we wanted to have, although it doesn't really produce any problems. So I managed to adjust the calipers. The pistons go back nicely retract, so no issues there like with the new SRAM brakes. Okay, so these are the experiences with the Hope RX4 calipers. If you want some more braking power on your road bike, gravel bike, cyclocross bike, etc., then it's a worthy upgrade for sure. If you want to know more about other high-end equipment that I work on or use myself, then don't forget to tune into the channel later on and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.